Welcome to Cyber Inspiration Podcast. My name is Evgeniy. I have been around cybersecurity for the last 20 years and I have a lot of experience working with a variety of cybersecurity vendors. My main work is vendor consulting and cybersecurity advisory for companies. As part of my passion in technology and cyber, I've been intrigued to learn how a company starts. I started the podcast to understand the thinking process and what motivated people to start their own company. This podcast is affiliated with Security Architecture Podcast. I have a pleasure today to talk to Ross Young about his book, and we are recording this literally 2 days after the book was released. So I'll do my best to push it as quick as possible because I think it's an awesome work. I had a small experience and pleasure to read the book before it came out. So Ross, please tell me about yourself and the book.
Hey, thank you again for having me here today. I'm excited to share my new book. It's called Cybersecurity's Dirty Secret: Why Most Budgets Go to Waste. And basically, I stepped into the role of CISO, and what I found was there's so much financial things that we need, wisdom on. Like, how do we figure out what to invest in? How do we figure out what to get rid of? How do we figure out how to do master service license agreements and all these financial things that I never read, studying for a CISSP or anything else, but yet that was exactly what I was asked to do. So I thought, why not share the wisdom with others and make our industry smarter?
And I really, really like the idea because in the end of the day, and people forget about this, if we build a very shiny toy, but nobody buy the toy, or there's no money coming into the business, guess what? It doesn't matter. So with the security professionals, if we don't understand the business we are protecting, we're not doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I always do like to use this phrase. Cybersecurity is the business of revenue protection. That's our core mission. Are we doing that? Because if the business makes more money, they can pay for more cyber, and our shareholders, our customers, our employees, everybody's happy. So I think that's where we have to be.
Now, you kind of explained already what was the motivation to write the book, is basically what you did and what you needed to learn and share it with other people. And I want to understand what was your food process like, the idea of from the idea to publication, how long it took, what kind of made you to actually start writing as well?
Well, it took probably about a year. I had a bunch of ideas that were just floating in my head. And I started putting together some templates before I started writing things. And I'll just give you a quick story. I think that makes a lot of sense. So for years and years and years in my church, I did Boy Scouts. I was the 11-year-old Boy Scouts leader. And if you ask a bunch of 11-year-old boys, hey, I want you to plan what we're going to eat at a camp out, and you come back in like 15 minutes, nothing will have happened. They will have bickered, they will have fought, they will have, argued, and nobody have decided anything. Maybe they're just playing on their phone. But if you give them a template that says, I want you to pick a meat, I want you to pick a vegetable, I want you to pick a bread, I want you to pick, a drink, and say, not only do you have to pick those, tell me the POC, the person who's going to bring that supply. And you say, please fill this out. If you come back in 15 minutes, absolutely, it will be done. And so that important concept taught me the power of using templates. And we see this all the time in the business world. We have things like the SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, or Porter's 5 forces. But how do we bring that same level of maturity to cybersecurity? So that's what I try to do, show a lot of templates that can help people, from how do we figure out what we're going to murder and get rid of tools that aren't, showing really good value to the organization? Or what does a zero-based review look like when we actually create a budget for cybersecurity? Things like this that can really help us, instead of us, being able to just act like a bunch of 11-year-old boys who can't figure it out, right?
I definitely agree with frameworks. And I remember when I was learning photography, one of my teachers told me, don't try to experiment right now. Learn all the basics, learn everything you need to learn. And when you cover the basic, then you can start experimenting with other things. And I think it's also important to cybersecurity. There's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of basic things. Don't try to reinvent the wheel.
do what makes sense, what other people did. And I think this is what you're creating right now. You're creating a guide, a frame for people to understand what they can do, and then they can modify, change for themselves when they're ready. So who will be the target audience? I believe it's not the student. I believe it's someone that's ready to be your CISO, or someone that want to look on their work as a CISO, maybe from a different perspective.
Yeah, so the audience is multifold. First, anyone in cybersecurity leader who owns a budget, who deals with personal issues, I think can quickly benefit here, right? So things like CISOs, directors, SVPs, any of that, definitely core audience. The second thing is a lot of the things here are not unique to cyber. Like, how do you retain your best people? How do you create agentic AI to automate some of the things your people do? How do you do master service license agreements and procure with vendors? These are things that can help the IT department as a whole. So it's bigger than that. And then the other thing that I wanted to also provide a look in is what are the things that could help a chief financial officer or CEO so that they can, challenge the CISO a little bit just to say, show me how you're making good use of the money we're investing in you, right? And in giving them insights of like, how do you map what you're doing to the real cyber threats attacking your company? How do you actually prioritize what things to do when you have 50 things that need money, but we only have enough money for 20 of the 50 things? So different things like that can help people, which I don't think are exclusive to the CISO, but it gives a way for them to get a lens into the CISO's mind and how they should make decisions. And I think this can also even help, some of the people on the sales side as well, because they've never been a CISO, but maybe they want to understand how CISOs make purchasing decisions, priority decisions, things like that to help them understand the other side of the sales side.
This is good. This is good. I really like this information and idea. Now, you already had a lot of information in your head, but I'm still guessing, and you and me work a bit on other things, vendor related, the validation process. Like, how did you approach the stuff you were not sure, or you wanted to validate, or do you want to make sure there's another point of view that will be correct?
So the first thing that I did is I wrote the book, and while I was writing the book, I was interviewing a ton of CISOs and asking them for ideas and asking them, what is it I'm forgetting and I'm not including in this book? And so they would say, "Oh, Ross, you forgot this on the master service license agreements." And so, I would bring in some of my friends who were distributors, some of the people who were, vice presidents at places like Optiv to get that angle and understanding, right? And then I would also, try to talk to CISOs. So, meeting with really special people that gave me their insights as well, right? So I would say this book was largely my thought and experiences, but I also, did a lot of peer review from probably about 200 CISOs to put this book together.
Sense. Let's talk about writing process. Some people are very, very dedicated, very organized. They basically allow them time. This is my time. I will write a book. Some people more about inspiration. Okay, I have inspiration right now. I'm going to go and write for 6 hours. What was your approach?
I'm one of those people who's kind of I can just start writing and the ideas start flowing when I have the time. And to be fair, there's also times of the day when I'm more productive and times of the day when I'm not productive. I like to think of myself like a battery, where in the morning I'm super smart, I'm fully charged. By the end of the day, when I get off work, I'm sorry, my kids, they get the battery on empty at that point of the time. So I'm not, at my smartest points of the day. But what I would try to do is I would try to look for ideas during the week that I thought were really powerful ideas that I wanted to include in my book. And then when I had the time, I would then expand on those ideas. So I might go in and say, I know this book needs a chapter about how do we save money on AWS hosting costs. And so that was the core idea. And I would just kind of think and ponder on that idea for, a couple days. And then I would write that chapter. And my process that's a little different is whenever I write a chapter, I write it out. And then I asked ChatGPT usually the same query, which is given this text, make it more catchy and grammatically correct. And it just enhances my language with, some sharper words that maybe I'm not, this like English thesaurus type person who can just come up with everything. So I would use that. And then I would also bounce with Grammarly to also get that, grammar inspection to make sure I didn't have a period instead of a comma or whatever those little things. And so that allowed me to rapidly iterate, have very, powerful language from some of the LLM enhancements, as well as, leverage AI to remove some of the copy editing mistakes that, most authors would typically make.
About creativity, did you ever had the time where like, why I'm doing that? Nobody gonna read this. I need to just stop and do something else and go back to be a CISO.
I feel this quite frequently, if I'm being honest. Like, I was a CISO for 4 years at Caterpillar Financial. Then I was a CISO in residence at Team 8, which is a very prominent Israeli venture capital firm. And then I kind of left to, do my own startup and do this book and other things. And a lot of times it's a big step back because, founders don't make 500K, 800K a year. They're living in like the 200K piece until the company takes off. And so if you've achieved that level of a good salary, it's a risk. And you often say, well, why am I going back to living, I don't want to say poor, but living like middle class again when I've already achieved this? And at the end of the day, I think you just have to really believe in where you're going. Is this how you want to spend your life? And for me, there's just this big piece of wanting to be a professor, wanting to be a teacher and educator and helping and giving back. And so that was something really important for me. But at the same time, I often feel like, is anybody going to listen? Am I going to put all these hours or year of my life into a book and put this out there? And then maybe like 10 people will be like, that was cool, Ross. And then like nobody else cares.
So what helped? Like what helped move forward?
Well, what I would say is I've been very lucky to have done two things. The first is I've really tried to mentor for not just the past year, but probably the last 10 years of my career. And so when I started putting this book out, it was amazing how many of the friends that I had mentored from Capital One 5 years ago, or other places that all came in and said, "I can't wait to read your book." And I think that really goes a long way just to think about what are you doing to constantly help people. And the second thing that I did was I've been doing this podcast called CISO Tradecraft for 5 years, where we built this out to 35,000 followers. And had I not done that, I don't think I would have really had a good network that I could go and influence if I was just, this typical person with like 100 friends on Facebook saying, please listen to me. I don't think I would have just gone viral with like one video. It was spending 5 years of posting to get to that size audience, to then when I launch a book, that now I have, some credibility behind me and they've listened to my advice for years. Right.
And with a rapid change of cybersecurity, how do you know if the book going to be relevant in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years?
Well, I think there's certain problems that never go away in cybersecurity. How much should we spend? I think that question will always be relevant in cyber. What should we get rid of? How do we cut our budget? How do we actually do more with less? These are questions that every CISO should be constantly thinking of, if not at least once a year when they do next year's budget and offsites. So I think these are things that will stand the test of time. I'm sure others will start writing books maybe in this area, and I can't wait to read the future body of literature. But I just thought this was a gap that I hadn't seen a lot of books covering before.
Let's dive in a bit into the book. So how many chapters right now in the book?
30 chapters.
30 chapters. can you, we're going to approach them like if this chat GPT, review this from an author, review this from a critic. So what are the 2 or 3 your favorite chapters?
The chapter I really like in the book is a book over here. Let me just pull up the name because if I don't read it, I'm sure I will get it
And you
wrong.
can even say the number
It's
of,
chapter 13. Should we switch tools and what should we murder? Is the chapter. And the concept of the chapter is really the following. I find most CISOs, when they walk into a company, they make a very bad mistake. And I see it from almost every CISO, which is they go in and they say, oh, tell me what tools and stuff we're running here. And they learn the list of 50, 80 tools in a large company. And they're like, oh, I can't believe we're using this vendor. You're not using the same vendor tools that we used at my last company. Well, we got to rip and replace those. And so ultimately, that approach means we got to go buy 3 or 5 new tools, which means I have to go bug the chief financial officer for budget to get new money to buy the tools. And I think that's the wrong approach. I really do. What I would love to see more company CISOs do is go in and say, we're going to create a murder board. We're going to go in and I want to look at every tool and tell me what coverage do we have it on. For example, endpoint detection and response. Is it on 99% of the endpoints or 88% of the endpoints? And then once we know that feature, the second one to look at is coverage and utilization. So the utilization piece is out of the 10 features that could be turned on this tool, how many did you turn on? And this comes from a lesson I learned at an organization, which I was looking at the WAF, and they were all excited. They deployed the WAF on 300 applications. And when I started talking to the developers, they're like, oh, yeah, we turned off all the WAF rules because they were causing issues to the application. Well, if the WAF rules aren't on, you don't have a WAF, right? You have vaporware is what you basically have. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to make sure we looked at what is the coverage, what percentage of the boxes is on, and what percent of the important features are turned on or utilization. And if you multiply those 2 numbers together, you get something I call an effective protection score. So if we have 90% of the EDR on our endpoints, but we only turn 40 or 50% of the features on, we really only have a 45% deployment. And so that I think is really powerful. And when we start looking for that across our 50 tools, now we can say, man, these tools really aren't giving us this effective protection we need. We either have to fix that or we get rid of them. And that was a really powerful concept for the murder board chapter in chapter 13.
This is chapter 1. Any other chapters that really, really, really love?
Yeah, so the last chapter is something that I introduce, and I've never seen anybody talk about this, but it's one of the things I'm probably the most well known for. And I call it Chapter 30, License to Build the Developer's Driver's License. And the idea being the following. Imagine you have a nice car. You have, I don't know, the family car. Would you just give the keys to your 16-year-old son who's never driven before and say, good luck? Absolutely not. We have things we've created as a society like, hey, you have to pass a written test to make sure you know the rules of the road before you get a permit. We make sure that someone has so many hours where they actually get mentored and pass a basic skills exam before then they're able to get their license. But we don't do that in software at all. We give them the developer admin keys without ever teaching them all the ways to deploy software at our company, without showing them, what the expectations are to have, this software go through this checklist to make sure it's secure. And I think this is a big, big problem, right? And just think about it. Like every other industry has some type of licensure. Doctors have to pass a medical exam. Lawyers have to pass the bar. Even forklift drivers have to pass a forklift exam. And you're telling me that we don't do anything for developers in large companies? No wonder why our apps are as insecure as they are. And so I think, building this developer driver's license exam, which I only say is a week long, like the first week of when somebody onboards into the company. I think this should be the new expectations for how do we increase the quality of our software code going forward.
Okay, let's switch to I want to be a CISO and I only can read 2 or 3 chapters. Which one would I read?
Hmm. The probably one of the best chapters here. I call it CapEx, OpEx, RevEx, FinEx. Enough already. Focus on the total cost of ownership. And in that chapter, what I teach people is when you try to figure out the cost of an application, consider three primary things. What are the labor costs? Imagine if I have 4 headcount at 200K each, that's 800K in labor costs. What are the licensing costs? Oh, I am buying Splunk and I got to pay this much in Splunk fees. And what are the hosting costs? Hey, if I host on AWS, AWS charges my team a bill for this product. You combine all of those together and you get something called a total cost of ownership. And you can look at that across all of your different applications. And then this really helps you figure out some really important things like where are my biggest opportunities for cost savings? Where are my opportunities where maybe I want to reduce my labor costs and do different things? Like, hey, if I have a, application that I write myself and it's very expensive to maintain, maybe I should just be buying a SaaS tool, right? I was talking to a company today and they were like, hey, we are building our own vendor management solution. And you're like, you could just buy Beeline to do that. You don't have to build this from scratch. And if it's going to take you a year and it's going to take you 3 or 4 headcount to do this, you might just save a lot just buying a third party SaaS. So understanding those pieces is key. And the other piece I really talk about is within labor costs, there's actually 2 costs. The first I use is called operations and maintenance. What percentage of the time is just keeping that app alive? And then the next one I would call new features. And both of these have to sum up to 100%. So if 80% of the developer's time is on maintenance, they only
Mhm.
have 20% left for new features to improve the product. And I think this is a really powerful thing because if you go to an application team and let's say it's these 4 headcount and they're spending 80% of their time on maintenance, and you say, what if we were to build out version 2.0 of this? And now I want you to get to a place to where your maintenance is only 30% of the time and you have 70% to build new features. What would that world look like? And how much would it cost to rewrite the app so that it could be serverless or whatever it needs to be so it does that thing? And now if they go in and say, well, that's a $2 million thing. Okay. And you're telling me if I can save, $500,000 by going down 50% of, this amount, you can go in and say, well, maybe that's a 4-year ROI. That's probably not a good investment. But what if you did it and it was like, hey, we're going to actually pay this off in only a year just by lowering our maintenance costs? Oh my goodness, that's a really good win that you could take to the chief financial officer, you could take to their IT managers and others. And so now you have a story where you can go in and say, we're going to make it cheaper, faster, better. Security's built in on the next version. You got more time for your developers and we're saving money, right? So things like this can be really, really powerful stories for
Yeah,
CISOs.
I liked it. You have 30 chapters. 30, correct? 32. 30. How hard it was to put them in logical? Are they in logical order? Or people can bounce left and right?
Well, I think each chapter stands on its own. It doesn't have to be read in sequential order. And I'll tell you even a little tip on this. When I wrote the 30 chapters, because I knew they all stood on their own, I even asked ChatGPT and Claude and these others to say, how should I organize these 30 chapters in a way that most makes sense? So it actually organized the chapters for me and told me how to reorganize them. So I kind of have, a couple of core modules, first or sections. The first section is show me the money. The second is section is where budgets go to die. The third one is winning the budget game. The fourth is, cutting costs without cutting corners. And then the last one is about the human factor. What are the things we do on the people side of things? So that's just how it grouped. And it wasn't my thought. That I think is where the LLMs helped me to organize.
Geeky question. Did Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini had a similar way of do them, or each of them decided differently?
They were pretty different. I had to kind of put it through all the different engines and then figure out which one I preferred between the approaches.
If you're gonna go back right now, a year ago, would you do anything different to write the book?
So what I would say is while writing the book, I figured out a lot of ways to be more effective in writing the book. Like maybe the first chapter I wrote in just Google Docs. And then afterwards, then I started switching to Atticus, which is a book format designed for online books. And then after I started writing the chapters, then I figured out, oh, I'll ask ChatGPT to make it more catchy and grammatically correct. And then I could write faster because I wasn't just agonizing over the wordplay of the language. And then afterwards, then, I started trying to build different ways to share it. So just there are just like so many little performance enhancements of how you write a book so that every chapter you get faster. What I would say is I probably wrote the last 15 chapters in the time that it took me the first 4 chapters, right?
Any recommendation for new writers that you can share right now?
Well, I personally think ChatGPT is such a performance enhancement. And what I mean by that is I don't think you should just ask ChatGPT to write the book. I think that is the wrong thing to do. But I do think if you ask ChatGPT to make your language a little more catchy, it's really good at that. And so that will make your language pop. If you ask, Grammarly to clean up all of the editing mistakes, now you don't have to go and get a copy editor because it's essentially a copy editor that's just AI. And so I think of that, of having that rapid iteration where I don't have to wait 3 days for a copy editor to read it and get back to me. I can just throw it in Grammarly and get it done in 10 minutes. Those speed enhancements allowed me as a single, publisher author to do it myself. And then I actually self-published with Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. So I found that was something really important to me because I wanted to own the copyright and the content. And we're seeing a lot of companies these days where they're like, well, you can't use ChatGPT because they're old school publishers. And you're like, I don't think that's how the world works anymore. That's like telling, someone to drive across the country with old school maps instead of a GPS and
Yes, yeah.
directions on their phone. It's like I think we've moved past that. But there's risk to these large scale publishing companies. And so this is where I thought I needed it to be to own the copyright, to reuse my course content however I wanted from my book, right?
Let's do a bit of a projection. Christmas is soon. If you have a Christmas one, what is your wish for the book?
So my wish for the book, if I'm being very selfish, is really two things. One is I would love to stay like a leader in one of the categories going forward. With anything, I'm sure there's a big push on opening day. I just don't know if this was a fluke and it'll remain at number one, 3 months from now or not. I certainly hope it
Which
does.
categories, by the way, so people will know?
Yeah. So I on the Kindle book store, I chose 3 categories. They are business operations research, business systems and planning, and I think the other one is like strategy something. And so I'm hoping it remains to be something just to help the industry. And then the second thing that I will also say, and this I heard from a number of authors, is you never write a book to make money. A book is essentially a 300 page or 200 page business card. What it
Yes.
does is it establishes you as an expert and then allows you to do consulting or speaking engagements on that. So my aspiration, if anything, is I would just love to, do book signing events or speaking events and help more people with the content. So I don't know when those things will come, but I'm hopeful
They
at the
will.
moment.
They will. Last part, 5 years forward. Let's see, and you and me will check in 5 years. What do you see? Book, training, webinars, seminars.
So I actually already built an online course from the book. I used Notebook LLM to create videos from each of the chapters and create a quick online course that I think is fantastic. But I think where I'm going to go is building some more books in the future. I was talking to my wife today, and she hates everything I do on the books, which is kind of funny. She keeps me very humble and honest versus I'm always, out there super gung ho and excited. But I was talking about there's probably the next book that I'm going to do, and there's kind of two ideas here. One is I've always liked recipe books with pictures, right? You go and you're like, I'm going to make dinner, but I don't want to just read the things. I want pictures to figure out which thing looks good before I, make that recipe at the house. I'm wondering, should we have a recipe book for cybersecurity strategies? Like, hey, if you're in this situation, choose this recipe, right? And I've not seen anything like that. So that's something I've been tinkering with. The other one I've also considered is a choose your own adventure. So I don't know if you remember those books when you were a kid where it's like, hey, turn to page 50 if you do option one, or turn to
Yeah.
page 80 if you're on option two. But I always used to like those. And I always thought there should be something like, hey, here's a cyber crisis event and you're the CISO. What are you going to do? And you kind of turn through the page and choose your own adventure and, see what happens, right?
Yeah. Ross, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. You were an amazing person to be on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking. So thank you for very much being here.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.